All right. Today we have Tony Hunt, and Tony Hunt was the stunt driver double for lead actor Christian Bale in the recently released hit movie Ford versus Ferrari. There you go. So, so how you doing, Tony? Let's go ahead and throw up some shameless plugs there. There's
There's
nothing
another
wrong.
one there.
There you
You got to
go.
make sure that you buy your Steelbook version either at Best Buy or Target, because each of them have a little bit different flavor to them.
Ah,
One of them's got a nice, different covers. One of them's got a nice little photo book inside. And as you can see, this one right here, if you look really, really close,
go a little
they
bit to your left. There you go.
if you look really close, the guy that's in the car, well, they forgot to edit out the real guy, or actually the star, and they left the stunt driver in the car on the cover of the DVD. I'm not sure if I should be getting royalties for that, but we'll let it slide this time.
Yeah.
And if you haven't got your cool, clear vinyl of the soundtrack,
Oh,
this is
wow.
a great collector's item. I think they made a limited run of these, but everybody needs a new vinyl, especially a clear one of the soundtrack of the movie.
Nice. So, okay, so people can't see the movie in theaters. So where can they see it now from the shelter in place?
Well, that's easy because you can download it in about 75 different capacities, whether or not you have the capability. But it's really easy, of course. What I have discovered, and I need to do a little more research, is that when I downloaded the one on iTunes and watched it on my Apple TV, there's a really cool, like 45-minute extras version of some behind the scenes stuff that has a nice couple interviews that I did in there as well. But what I did notice is I'm not sure if they're applicable or seeable on the DVDs. So
Oh,
I'm
okay.
not sure if that's something proprietary to iTunes, but you can download it on Amazon, iTunes, of course, any other interface online. And then, of course, everybody needs their personal hard copy version on a DVD.
There you go. You can probably order that through Amazon, have it delivered right to your house, and
You bet.
I'm sure there's a bunch of ways to get it. So, so I thought that we would work our way towards questions about Ford versus Ferrari because that's really something important. But your family has a long history in automobile racing. You as well, your father, your grandfather. So, what about just like a short family history of the Hunt family?
Oh, wow. Well, I sit in my office here and I could show you around a little bit, but there's quite a few pictures in my office here of a lot of neat stuff
Oh,
throughout the years of the history of where all this got started. But a lot of it did get started with my grandfather back in the day. And he owned cars at Indianapolis and dirt champ cars that a lot of the very familiar and famous names drove throughout their careers. And then my father obviously got the bug as well because he was hands-on at Indianapolis and throughout the country at all the neat dirt tracks, the mile dirt tracks and stuff. Got to witness the rise and fame of guys like Foyt and Unser and Andretti, and really get to see the real roots of how our industry took off back in the day when the men were men and the boys were boys.
yeah.
And but I was exposed to it at an early age as well. Being around it, obviously, it was very impressionable to me and seemed like a cool thing to do. And back in those days, you didn't have a lot of things to occupy yourself, like video games and all the other activities that you do these days. So I was pretty focused on, the idea of wanting to be a race car driver, being racing in some capacity at a very early age. Certainly watching my dad race at Ascot down in Southern California
Yeah.
was very, had a big impact on me and impression on me and what racing was all about. So It was it seemed like a nice transition, and I'm super fortunate, obviously, to have that exposure and to have it be a goal-driven guiding direction for me in life.
Yeah. So what did you start racing? I mean, what kind of race car? What, go-karts or?
So I started racing. I'm not sure if I have a picture in here, but I did. I started racing quarter midgets down in Southern California at Pomona Valley Quarter Midget Association, and at about 5 years old, because that was the thing that everybody was kind of doing, and
Yeah.
those were the early age options. Now you've got so many other options, but that was for me, where everything got started. And then when we were living in Southern California, we moved up here shortly after that, and I got started in karting and actually on the dirt, and then got right into the sprint kart stuff and the road racing kind of karting stuff. And then from there, it just kind of stair stepped the ladder up of racing stuff. I did modified midgets, and then kind of got in a direction of, hey, if you're going to race an Indy or have aspirations to race an Indy, you need to be in somewhat of a rear engine car. So I went to the Russell School down at Laguna Seca,
Oh, nice.
and got my early training down there at the Russell School. And from there, I raced the Formula Mazda series there, and then jumped into the Formula 2000 series. And then my career kind of took a pivotal change from there. It seemed like the IndyCar thing was, there was a big shakeup, obviously, with IndyCar and kart at that time, and there was not a lot of formidable direction. And more importantly, the cost to do that was going to be pretty substantial. So we decided at that time, stock car racing was becoming more and more popular, that might be a direction to go and something that was maybe more affordable. So we ran the Winston West series, which is now called actually, as of this year, the ARCA Menard series,
Right.
formerly the Winston West series back in the early 90s. And then shortly after that, we kind of run out of funds quite early, easy to do. And I moved to Charlotte. And when I moved to Charlotte, um, I figured, hey, I need to be on these tracks and have some experience. And I felt like the only way to do that was to go to work at one of the racing schools. So I went to work at Fast Track Driving School, Andy Hillenberg School,
Oh, nice.
and then I went to work at the Petty School shortly after that. But those platforms gave me an opportunity to drive on every one of those tracks that was currently being sanctioned on a weekly basis for the Cup guys. So I felt like this is great. I've got some formidable on-track experience in the school cars, and this will give me a little bit of a foundation to hopefully get a ride. And you spend a lot of your time working, but of course trying to develop sponsorship and meet people and network so that you can
Yeah.
hopefully bang on the right door and have somebody open it and say, hey, let's make this happen. So about 5 year span of that, and it was tough. I mean, I can't say that that was the greatest thing that I did, because there were times when it was very tough, and it was, you're knocking on a lot of doors, and you're getting a lot of lip service, so to speak,
Yeah.
and a lot of no's. And so, I did some late model racing back there, and a few other things, but for the most part, it was just really tough. And I think my timing was a little off, because at that time they kind of wanted the veterans back in the day that were sort of proven. The young people weren't really being considered unless you had a ton of dough. So,
Yeah.
I was spending a lot of time trying to find the right funds to leverage an opportunity, and that didn't seem to materialize. So I moved back to California, and at that point I was pretty distraught and disappointed, and certainly all those emotional things you go through is when you're trying to make something happen. And got right into a sprint car right away, thanks to an opportunity by a guy named Ken Pearson here locally. And from there, it kind of just took off, and kind of was like, hey, I need to be driving something, and I need to be racing so I can prove myself and hopefully get some opportunity on TV to maybe leverage that, and
Yeah.
an opportunity to gain some identity that I had at least a little bit of ability to make it work. So that all happened, and by that time, you're time it necessarily is when you're super young is on your side, but then when you get into your 20s, late 20s, things of that nature, it's not necessarily on your side anymore. And it really just comes down to being able to develop the right marketing partners to make things snowball into a bigger effort. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a nutshell of things. I raced with USAC, the midgets and sprint cars out here. Had a great time with doing that for, gosh, I think about at least maybe 12 years or something like that, and
Yeah.
won a few races and won a few championships and had a good time. And then obviously, um, that's kind of how the whole thing sort of developed into an opportunity for the film business
Well,
as
that
well.
yeah, that was going to be my next question is how does that transition happen? How does a sprint car midget winning driver all of a sudden get into the stunt driving? How does that?
It's a lot of life choices that direct you in ways that you can't always dictate. But in all honesty, I was fortunate to race with some guys that were circulating in the business as well. I'm a good friend of mine, Greg Tracy, who I raced with karts back in the day, was pretty seated in the business, and a couple opportunities and name referencing and that kind of stuff happened. But when it really happened, my first opportunity was way back in the day when I was at Russell. Um, I did a little skit on the hit series Coach with Craig T. Nelson. He was
Ah,
pretty tight in being a race driver at that point as well, and doing it as a recreation. And he did a little episode with Rick Mears that had some driving in. So I did it back then. But back then, I was still really focused on being a racer and making a career out of that. Little did I know that there was a film career that I could also have been a part of too. So I didn't really pay much attention to it until when I was living in Charlotte, at least almost 10 years later. I got an opportunity to do a Ford commercial at Darlington in some passenger cars. They needed some drivers that were familiar with the track, and I kind of got into the Screen Actors Guild union on that job, and it kind of opened my eyes to an opportunity there. And those, just on that day, met some people that I networked with, kept in touch, and those things kind of sort of snowballed into there. Shortly after that, I think the next big one was maybe the movie Herbie came along. Again, needing some stock car drivers that were familiar with stock cars and obviously racing. And then right after that, Talladega Nights came, and so a couple of big feature films were there. And then that all parlayed into a whole nother network of industry people that I was able to gain some relationships with that developed into some commercial work for car manufacturers and things like that. And then, I just kept sort of hopefully seeding myself in the business to where I could make that a somewhat of a supplemental income while I was still racing.
yeah, nice, nice. So, so you just mentioned one of my questions was going to be what other motion pictures have you been in? But you nicely already answered that for me. And I mean, I know lots of people know Talladega Nights. That was a pretty good movie. So, um, was there ever a stunt that you did that you, after it was over, you thought, I am never going to do that again?
I think there's enough people that have to sort of sign off on stuff that you do. Obviously, with the union environment, everything's kind of got to be looked at by several different eyes in the way that tries to make it as safe as possible. There's been a few occasions that you're put in on the spot that you're not prepared for, meaning that either you haven't driven the car, you haven't seen the terrain, you haven't seen the surface, all those things. And that's a very common thing that happens in our industry, just because everything's so timely. A lot of times you've got 200 or 300 people on set that are all in different departments that are depending on you to do the job and to do it in a timely fashion, and everybody's under the gun. So you have to improvise, and hopefully your background or skill set, just by experience, will get you through that unscathed, so to speak. But I haven't done any jobs that there certainly has been some jobs that are what we consider a pucker up factor. Would I do them again? Yeah, of course, now doing it and surviving it, I would do it again. But uh, there's been some times that even on Ford versus Ferrari that I was really really concerned. And while you're staging to do stuff like this, and everybody's getting prepared for the director to say action, a lot of things go through your head, and some of those are good and some of those are bad. But I think that if you don't have a little bit of that, certainly the fear or the concern, you can always balance it with your courage. But if you don't have both, it can get you in trouble sometimes. So you have to be logical about it, and you do have to at times be in a position where you can say, hey, this is not going to have a good outcome. We need to reconsider this, and maybe look at it a little differently, so it has a better outcome. So um, that's just part of the game. It's kind of like doing business and negotiating
Yeah.
right on the spot.
Yeah. So what about the flip side of that? Is it was there a stunt that you thought, oh man, that's so cool. I would, if they could let me do this one more time, I'm all in.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you do these stunts or do these scenes, you do them multiple times
Wow.
because they're trying to either find a different angle, they're trying to change filters, they're trying to, just give it a different perspective. And so you do scenes very often multiple times. And so, there's always those scenes that you go, that was really cool. I hope I don't have to do that again, because it's you're threading the needle and you're driving by the seat of your pants, and there's so many variables involved that if somebody slips up, it's going to be it's going to be an unfortunate situation. And for especially Ford versus Ferrari, I mean, you're dealing with a very expensive equipment, and you're dealing with period appropriate resources, meaning your safety gear and the cars and things like that. That if something goes wrong at those speeds and in those conditions, then the likelihood of somebody getting hurt is pretty high.
Yeah. Yeah. So so then let's talk about Ford versus Ferrari. Did you when you were somehow, and you can let us know how you were brought into this job, did you have any idea that this movie was going to be as big as it ended up turning out? Did you?
Not at all, not at all. And I'll kind of go backwards with this, but I mean, for months there, certainly after we were done filming, I don't think we ever put it out there, on social media, or ever said, hey, this is going to be a blockbuster, just because you don't know. I mean, by the time it gets to, the editing folks and everything else, they may have a different perspective or different point of view on how they want it to be perceived. And so you're always at risk of, that scenario. But fortunately, um, that department and all those departments that had their hands on it afterwards did some really amazing stuff with it and made it into a great movie. Now, to back up to the original days, I mean, or the days prior to filming, you hear about movies like this and you say, hey, people reach out and they say, hey, are you available, and yada yada, and then you kind of put it on the radar, so to speak. But what I've learned, it's kind of like racing, especially when you're a journeyman, until you get there and until your name's either on the car or the call sheet, there's no guarantees, because things, for political reasons or just uh, natural reasons, go away in a heartbeat. So I'd heard about this movie, and certainly, was super uh, stoked and excited to be a part of anything like this. And I was, reached out to by a good friend of mine who I'd worked with on a lot of previous movies, who's a racer as well, Robert Nagel, who happened to be the stunt coordinator on this film,
Okay.
and met with him, and went through a lot of different discussions with him prior to. And so this thing became a reality, and reached out to by, the folks at the studio and things like that. And you're signing paperwork and you're doing fittings and things like that, to which make it become more of a reality. And then on the first formidable days, you're doing some testing in the cars and you're thinking, wow, this is going to be a reality. But during that whole time, the 3 months of shooting, you have no idea, really. You see these, what they call previs, which is kind of like an illustration of what the shot is supposed to look like. And then we had like a play sheet that Robert would give us that would show us locations of where we needed to be at each different scene. And he'd call out a scene and we'd look for placement on where our car needed to be in that particular scene at that point. And but through all this, I mean, we didn't know really the whole picture of, the drama side of it and the story side of it, other than the history that we were well aware of how it was going to be played out. But when we started testing and stuff, I think there was a big group of us, of course, and we were all, getting in different cars and trying to, set some cars up and just try to make sure that they were driver friendly and roadworthy and willing to go fast enough for what they really wanted us to do in somewhat of a respectable manner. And on the day prior to, Robert had approached me and said, "Hey, I think we're going to have you, play the Ken Miles part that Christian played." And I was like, "Oh, okay, no big deal." I didn't really think about the magnitude of it until several months after, and certainly on the day you're dressing in the period appropriate stuff, of how really big that opportunity was. And everybody on the film, including all the stunt guys throughout that whole department, just did an amazing job. And everybody had a great time, of course, as well. So when I got that part, it was pretty surreal because, here we all standing around in the period appropriate stuff, and the scene looks like it's, way back in the day. And you've got the extras on hand. They're all dressed way back in the day, and the cars all look like that. You're at Willow Springs, which virtually hasn't changed much since,
Exactly.
back in the 60s. And it just paints a really neat picture. And, you on those days, you just wish you could freeze the clock just to capture that moment of how much of an impact it has. So, I always tell people that, every day that I got in and strapped in was, pretty emotional for me, not only because I enjoy doing what we're doing and I love the business, but to be able to be a part of such a movie of that, of the story and that magnitude was really, really emotional to be able to recreate that stuff.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it was hard to hold back that emotion because your adrenaline's rolling and you're such in the moment that it just really engages you into a really neat zone of being focused.
Yeah, I bet. So now, there were some stunt drivers that had direct connections to that time period, right? I mean, there was Dan Gurney's son, I believe, right? Driving?
Yeah, so Alex Gurney obviously played his dad, Dan Gurney, and Jeff Bucknam was playing his dad on a few parts. And his dad was Ronnie Bucknam, and then of course Derek Hill was there as well, and he played his dad as well. So it was neat to see the emotion that those guys embraced as well, to play their dads, and to see the commonality of how much they were in the moment as well. And I
Yeah.
think that energy with us all on set was it was like no other, because those guys were living through their dads at that
Yeah.
era. And to see that was more exciting for me than anything else because of what the opportunity they've been given as well. So um, it was amazing, and it's so fun to see those guys in that moment. And I had never I worked with Jeff Bucknam on occasion throughout the industry, and then but I never met Derek or Alex, and both of those guys have now become to be really good friends that we communicate and talk with on a weekly basis. So just great friendships were made, and during some really, really inspiring times of our lives.
Yeah, I bet that must have been super cool. So tell us about, I know you and I have talked before, and you had expressed that, the pressure in terms of getting the shots done in the least amount of takes as possible, because there's this huge amount of of production. Like you said, the I mean, just what it costs per hour to do this. So let's just say, what was like the most tense shot or scene that you had to do in the where you felt the most pressure, or the most, maybe,
Concern.
yeah, concern. Yeah, exactly, concern. Kind of searching for
Yeah.
a word there.
Well, the thing about it is that this was a unique film in the way that a lot of the stuff, besides all the stuff we did in Georgia to recreate a lot of the Le Mans track scenery, but a lot of the stuff at Willow Springs and then at the Agua Dulce Airport, which they recreated the whole backdrop for the Le Mans pit road, were all done with first and second unit, meaning that the first unit was the actors that came in to do a lot of their dialogues. So we worked with them on a daily basis on several different locations. So what made it more concerning was the fact that they had to get all their stuff done and we had to get our stuff done in between. So a lot of times it was a rush, rush, rush for us because they wanted to get back to doing their dialogue. There's only so much sunlight. A lot of the scenes have to be captured in a replicable shot that they did prior to make sure that the lighting and everything is correct so that it can seem seamless in regards to the prior days that they shot. So, everybody's in a rush and everybody's responsible. Those different, folks that are in charge of the lighting and things like that and the shot. And so everybody gets in a frenzy at times, and the anxiety level gets a little bit crazy, and people get in a rush, and that's a lot of times when things can go wrong. So it's your job and every department's job to really stay as calm as possible and to try to eliminate as much confusion or wrongdoing as possible. But um, I think a few of our shots that were the concerning ones were the ones, of course, that we did at night because limited visibility. Obviously, they didn't have great lights either on the cars or at the racetracks
Yeah.
back in the day, and then they added the rain scenario, and the rain scenario was a whole different challenge just because when you drive in rain, obviously racing in rain has a different technique in itself. But when you drive from the dry into the rain and you drive into blankets of rain, it creates quite a hair-raising scenario because the surface condition changes so drastically that if the car is not in a controlled state in some capacity, whether it be on an angle or something at that kind of speed, it's could potentially catch you off guard. So there were a lot of times when you'd be racing into this rain, this blankets of rains that they produce from these huge towers that were on cranes that just blanketed the racetrack that were super concerning on whether or not the car was going to come out on the other side straight, because you'd go through this period of rain that was pretty lengthy, and you're just trying to maintain directional control and trying to visibly see where you're going as well, because as soon as that rain came down, those little windshield wipers couldn't keep up with it, and it was it was a challenge. You're just hoping that you can see some sort of reference or some light at the end of that scene that will give you some guidance on where to point the car. So
Yeah.
those were the concerning parts, because you've got so many people. You've got people standing in pit road at the airport there, that if something went wrong, and fortunately they had the barriers and stuff there on the pit road that the guy stood behind. But if something went wrong at seconds notice, then it could have been a big scenario.
Yeah.
So those were certainly concerning moments that were ones that you got to the end of the day and you're just a relief that everybody got back to the hotel unscathed.
Yeah. So you're not like driving 60 miles an hour through this rain. You're at speed, right?
You're at speed. I mean, you're going as fast as you can go. Literally, the director was saying, hey, can we get him going faster, faster, faster? And that's when things start to get a little bit dicey, because you're going out there, trying not to leave anything on the table and trying to get going as fast as possible. The problem was that we faced, is that the cars all dynamically had a different control capability to them.
Uh,
Not only obviously naturally, as far as the suspension and stuff, but also we had an issue with tires and trying to find the right tire that would help the cars plane over the water effectively and maintain control. And so you're dealing with the Porsches and some of the other cars that didn't quite have as much horsepower, with a better tire that were sometimes capable of going maybe quicker than the GT40, just maybe because we didn't have
uh,
a proper tire on the GT40 yet. So and they had plenty of power to slip those tires at any occasion. So you had to be really cautious and careful on what gear you're approaching, obviously that rain area in, and certainly the directional control of the car, because once you hit that amount of water, that unfortunately at the airport, the surface was relatively flat, so it wasn't draining a lot of water. So a lot of
uh,
standing water created a hydroplane situation on several occasions, and you were just hoping that like I said, there was some directional control once it landed,
yeah.
after that actual scene there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, we are glad that you're here to tell us about this. That no one got hurt. Seriously, that sounds pretty ominous. Who's been your biggest mentor? Who's had biggest impact on your life in terms of like a mentorship?
you know so many people that I've come across, through the different facets of racing, whether it be quarter midgets, karting, formula cars. Um, but specifically speaking in regards to the film industry stuff, I think my biggest mentor, been several people, but I think one of the biggest guys that's been an influence, whom I dearly respect and whom I consider a great friend, has been Alan Padelford, who is a camera car driver that does just amazing stuff, obviously, in the camera car to capture all these movements and movies. That is a amazing, like I said, amazing driver himself. Doesn't always get a lot of worthy credit, so to speak, because he's kind of behind the scenes guy, but just been a great friend and great mentor to me on guidance and opportunity. I've been fortunate to drive many of his different types of equipment in a lot of different movies, and he has I met him early on, way back in the days of the commercials and the movies as well, and we've always had a great rapport and I think respect for each other. But he's been a real staple and certainly a pivotal mentor in my career, along with several other people. I mean, there's guys that have been really helpful and encouraging and been there to really be instrumental on direction and stuff, like guys Rich Rutherford, I mentioned Greg Tracy, Steve Kelso, and then of course Robert Nagel, who has been a great friend as well, and the stunt coordinator on Ford versus Ferrari. So you run across a lot of great people in the industry, not only in racing but the film business as well. And in my racing, I had a lot of great car owners, and that car owners are characters. They have unique personalities themselves, and as a journeyman, your job, and in the film business, is the same thing. Your job is very dependent upon your ability. And like they say, you're only as good as your last race. You're only as good as your last movie. So it's very similar to that. And car owners kind of like directors. If they like you and you guys have a good rapport and you get a great shot and everybody's happy, studio's happy or the client's happy, and then you go on to the next one and just continue to create that energy and you know and the rapport that you have to make things work out well. So it's been neat, and relationships to me, whether it be in the racing, have provided such a story, so to speak, but
Yeah.
an impact on really the depth of my racing career or the film business, because those relationships are the ones that you've had to rely on as far as honesty and respect and loyalty and all that kind of stuff that has you know that keeps you grounded, so to speak. So those have always been a really important part to me, not only with racing, but like I said, the film business as well, because you get to a point where you do a lot of jobs, and when you do several jobs throughout the year, you'd kind of rather be doing them with people that you respect and have a lot of
Yeah.
that working relationship just seems to be a given, where you can get a shot done, or you're in a racing zone where you just believe in that person. You have that combined effort that really produces some really successful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. That networking and that, like you said, that loyalty and trust, that goes a long ways. Don't burn a bridge.
Amen.
I've been told a lot. So that's that's great. All right, filming's done, and everybody goes their ways. And you've driven this in the beginning scenes. You drove uh, as Ken Miles in the '98 Shelby Cobra, and I guess there were more than one. But anyhow, you now own one of the movie cars. So how did you? When did you become interested, or how did that happen? That you all of a sudden thought or heard, hey, I could buy that, or I'd like to buy that. How did that work?
It was just by chance. I had met Rich McDonald, who was the representative for Superformance down in Los Angeles, who provided some of the cars for the movie. And he gave me a business card when we were on set, one of our last shoot days there in Fontana, which was the backdrop for Daytona. And I'd reached out to him and I said, "Hey, what's going on with those cars? And where do they go from here?" And old Rich, he's quite the sales guy. He said, "Hey, it's your lucky day. There's one of those 98s that you drove, the Cobras that you drove, that's left." And I said, "Oh, really?"
We
He says,
got
"Yeah,
just one left.
yeah." He said, "The one you drove most, there were two other ones as well, and Aaron Shelby, Carol's son, got one of them, and Peter Miles got one." And he said, "But the one that you drove that had some of the cameras on them is the one that's left." And I said, "Oh, that's cool." I said, what do you guys do?" And what I didn't really call to solicit my interest in buying one. And I said, "Well, what kind of price are you guys selling those for?" Because I thought he would say something that was totally, out of my ballpark. But came down to it that he gave me a price, and I shook my head and I said, "Oh gosh, that puts me in a little bit of a bind here, because that doesn't seem too out of the ballpark." And I'd certainly love to have some memento from the movie. So I got off the phone, and I struggled with it for a little while, and I said, "I really want to have this car." So long story short, I talked to my wife, of course, and tried to get a blessing there on that end, and she was all for it. So thankfully, and so yeah, I mean, they're super generous on what they offered the car for me, and said, "Hey, you're pretty deserving of having this car." So long story short, it's now a part of the family, so to speak, and
Yeah.
it's currently sitting down at the auto museum here in Sacramento, the
Yeah.
California Auto Museum.
Right.
They're doing a nice little static display down there, exhibit for real cars is what they're calling it, for a lot of
Right.
different movie cars. So it'll be down there sitting in the museum there till June. And hopefully a lot of folks, by the time we get out of our current situation, will have an opportunity to go see it.
Exactly. So I know originally, because in the movie, the big scene or one of the funny scenes is the wrench throwing that breaks the windshield in the Cobra. And I remember in the beginning that you had a complete windshield or windscreen, just a portion of it. But you just recently got the actual windscreen that was used in the movie with the masking tape taped down the
Yeah.
side. So
Yeah. I felt like, it was just by chance through, networking with some folks online. Um, and that somebody had said, "Hey, I have access to one of those prop windscreens that had the crack in it," and I felt like, man, I need to have that for my car to make it even more authentic. So, um, networking through a friend of a friend, and actually a friend here locally up in Northern California had access to it, and he was able to get it for me, and I put it on the car. So it just kind of that final, little piece of the pie there that makes that car even more special.
yeah,
Being that we drove a lot of the scenes with that cracked windshield like that, so pretty
yeah,
special.
yeah. So I know you don't just look at this car. You drive it because I've seen you driving around your sweet daughter, and you even told me I think that you pick her up at school or pick up your kids at school with it.
Yeah, yeah. I figured, it's close enough, and on a nice day, why not fire up the Cobra and take it for a spin? And the kids kind of dig it, so it's fun. Get out, stretch its legs a little bit, and try to burn off the carbon off the tips of those spark plugs is never a bad thing to do. And so, yeah, I mean, it's that's what it's for. So you got
Exactly.
to get it out and drive it, and I usually turn on a few tunes and get back in the zone of being old Ken Miles and buzz on down the highway.
Why not? I know a lot of. I mean, there's two sides. So a lot of people like just want to sit on their cars, but that I'm of the opinion. Sounds like you are as well. That you got to drive them, you got to enjoy them. So that's great that you're doing that. So,
Yeah.
so what's next on the horizon? I mean, obviously, nothing's going on now because you're stuck at home. But so, anything on come?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually on the way to a job on the 14th, 13th, actually, Friday the 13th, and on the way to the airport, and everything kind of shut down from there, got turned around, and had a few things. I was headed to Houston for a job, and everything got shut down. So, um, yeah, there is. I think the whole industry, obviously Hollywood shut down, is
Yeah,
a little bit of concern on what's next, and it's there's certainly some things that are obviously being talked about that were on the plate prior to, but I'll tell you, with the uncertainty we have going on now, there's not really a definitive timeline on when things are going to get started again.
yeah, yeah. So, a couple last closing questions. Do you own any other unique cars? I think did
I just acquired a 72 XKE 2.2 12 cylinder Jaguar, and that's a special car to me as well because I've been fortunate to work with that brand in the manufacturer business for the last 5 years, and
wow.
to have some history and just a beautiful car. Obviously, I love the classics, and to have a little bit of attachment to the brand in that capacity is kind of cool. So we try to buzz that around as well, and have some fun with it on a sunny day.
Ah, nice. I thought you were going to say you own a Ferrari. So
No, that'd be like changing alliances. If I'm going to be a Ford guy, I better stick with it for this point.
exactly. So, all right, last question, Tony. What's the best advice you've ever been given? In any,
On life, you learn so many things in life, especially the racing business and the film business are somewhat similar. Never let a small thing get you down, because you got to keep digging, and there's a lot of people that deal with a lot more struggles that are they're challenging. So you got to be able to hold your head high and just overcome the challenges and keep plugging away because Otherwise, you get stuck in the mud, and it takes a while to get out. So just keep positive, and keep being yourself really is important, and just do the best job you can, and hopefully that speaks for itself.
Yeah, awesome. Well, you're such an awesome guy. You're transparent. Yeah, I've heard, I don't know how many people that have met you. They said he's the real deal. So, thanks for coming and doing this, you know, interview that hopefully helps us all kind of forget some of what's going on in terms of what we're
Oh,
dealing with
amen.
and how serious it
You
is.
bet.
But hey, I got to say thank you for wearing that awesome hat, Cars and Coffee Whitney Ranch. I'll get my little plug in there too. So, so
Well, you're
anyhow,
doing a
so
great job. So you keep up the good work too, my friend, and hopefully we'll get some better days ahead. And all us car enthusiasts and race nuts can get back to the racetrack and get back to sharing a coffee on a Saturday and seeing some
yeah,
cool cars.
we will, America's strong. We will come back from this, and we just hope and pray for everyone who's struggling, because there are certainly a lot of people who are, and so we just kind of reach out and individually reach out to the people that are near us, and neighbors, friends, and in community, and just kind of help each other all out. So
Yeah, you
awesome.
bet.
So all right, Tony. Well, thanks for on a rainy Sunday for giving us a little bit of time,
You're
and
not kidding.
we'll just I'm sure we'll see you out and about at various car shows, bringing your awesome car. And so,
The sooner the better, my friend.
all
Thank you
right,
very much.
all
Great
right,
talking to
Tony.
you.
Have a
Take
great
care.
have a great
All right,
day.
bud. Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.